Okay, this is a new thing I'm doing on YouTube. I've been recently not mud riding as much because I'm saving up for a camper. So I still have the four-wheeler. Uh, she needs to be cleaned, but been working a lot, so really haven't had a chance to really do a whole lot with it. But anywho, we are making a clock. I have here a piece of pine that I got from Michael's or Michelle's, I don't know, whatever the name of that store is. And it's an arts and crafts store. I bought this, and here I have this. I paid about $9, I guess. It's just a little motor, little clock motor, keeps time with the things, and I also have some letters which will come in on another video. This is the brand of the clock, movement kit. Says here it uses a sorry, it's not really focusing. It says here it uses a 5/8 inch or it's a 5/8 inch movement with medium ornate. Not sure what that means. I just kind of wing this kind of stuff here. Anywho, I just drilled my hole. I didn't really measure. Last time I measured it, here's the other piece. I measured it and it came out not really centered. So this piece will be sanded down later and used for something else. I don't know, make something. But anyways, plus I spilt some, I don't remember what, I think it was tea or something. So note to self, make sure there's no open containers around your workstation, because pine especially will soak in a lot of wood. What I'm going to do today is right now I'm just going to sand this. The grain is a circular grain on this particular piece of wood, but the cut goes up and down. So instead of sanding with the grain, obviously that would be hard to just sand with the grain like so. I'm just going to sand up and down. And I'm going to start out, I'm going to use a 220 grit sandpaper, and it's going to do pretty much what I need it to do. Let me go, and that's about it. Tips. I guess this will be the tips section of this video. How-to video. I don't know, really more like an instructional video. Not really sure what I want to name it yet. What you will need to do this project. Obviously a piece of wood, you can cut it yourself. Keep in mind when you purchase your clock pieces, your hardware for the actual clock, make sure, drop my own things. Make sure you get the long shaft. Make sure you get the long shaft for the clock mechanism. Otherwise, you'll have to get a you'll have to make it deep inside on the other side of the clock, which, if that's what you prefer, you could do that if you want to save a little bit of money. Okay, but you will need this. You will need paper, because if you do a lot of work on your bench like me, I don't do just woodwork. I put four-wheeler parts on here, and I put all kinds of stuff on here, and it's so yeah. Anywho, also you will need, I use Minwax polyurethane fast drying, clear gloss, superior durability, long lasting protection. I use a pre-stain. After I sand, before I stain, I put pre-stain on, and I'm going to show you how to do that. What the pre-stain does is it seals in all of the open pores and uneven open pores from sanding, something like that. It prevents a blotchy finish whenever you do your stain. And believe me, it does make a difference. Now I have Cherry 235, Red Mahogany 225, and Dark Walnut 2716. Now, if you're like me and you like to do things a little differently from the rest of the public, what I tend to like to do, and I found is actually quite useful. I don't really have I have some right here, as a matter of fact. I do. I have this, and what this is a combination of stains, and basically I just added a little of the darker and a little of the lighter until I got the right color that I wanted. And I bought these from Walmart. These are some little plaques that I do a lot of testing on. Actually make stuff with them too. Comes out pretty nice. Until I got the right color that I wanted for my last project. You will also need foam brushes. You can use a paintbrush type brush if you like. They have some specifically for staining, but they're extremely expensive and they do not work near as well as these 38-cent jobs right here. And you can just use it and toss it because they're pretty damn cheap, and they do an excellent finish, excellent job on applying stain and applying polyurethane. I use a regular cheap, it's just a regular old cheap paintbrush, and you'll see what kind I use. It's the cheapest paintbrush you can find. You could actually use a rag to put this pre-stain on. I just use a paintbrush because it's easier and I don't get my hands dirty. Alright, next I'll be doing some sanding. Also, what helps, especially when you're sanding, I don't have an air compressor yet, so right now I just get this Ultra Duster stuff. Works pretty well. Keeps everything clean. Puts out a pretty good, decent amount of pressure, so it'll clean off all your dust from your workspace. Here I have some regular 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to sand. Let me set up my camera so that way you can see exactly what I'm doing. I don't think I'm going to be able to. Let's see. And just go with a light sand. You'll be able to tell with the naked eye when it's done and sanded correctly. Kind of hard to do this with one hand. Definitely want to go against on these round pieces, the cut grain. And whatever you do, do not go sideways or diagonal and whatever. No, you can't do that because you may not be able to see it when you do it. But when you apply your stain, that's going to be the first thing you see. And it will not go away. Now, you ask, why 220 and not a finer grit? Am I going to go to a finer grit? The answer to that is no, because for one simple reason, I want to put a dark stain on this piece of wood here, and if it's a fine grit, it won't soak up the stain as well. 220 is just fine. Now, if you want to do this kind of project and you don't want to do any kind of stain, you just want to put a clear gloss finish on it, by all means, use a fine grit. You can use up to a 125 grit. I mean, or a 320 grit. Because you know, obviously it will allow your polyurethane to shine better. But I prefer to use a 220 grit, and I usually put about 4 coats of polyurethane. I'm gonna go ahead and, for time's sake, put a pause. Okay. Now, take a feel. Feels, maybe it needs a little bit more sanding, especially around these edges here. Okay, I got my sanding done. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to wipe with a dry rag. See how, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's, get all that stuff off. Get it nice and clean. Basically, you want to wipe this down. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. You want to wipe this down, applying decent pressure until you get all the particulates out. And go over it. Alright. Now, I am going to do both sides, but for video's sake, I'm only going to do one side. One side of finish for the video, but I'm actually going to do both sides. Okay, now it's time to apply the pre-stain. Also, if you're like me and you sweat, be careful with your fingers and sweat and your wood, especially on a fresh sand. The oils from your sweat will actually soak into your wood and will affect your finish. And once you get it on there, it's really time consuming to get it out. Battery's going dead. Alright. So that brush I was telling you about, this is the pre-stain. I went ahead and moved this piece up and down because anytime you put anything on, you always want to go with the grain. And with this pre-stain, you ain't got to do nothing crazy with it. No special technique. Just get it on. See how this is soaking it up real good, real fast. So you want an even coat, and you can tell. You can tell where it needs some and where it doesn't need it. Just put a good coat. You want it to completely soak in. Alright. Okay, so my pre-stain has soaked for about 7-8 minutes. My bike, old four-wheeler, still kicking, dirty. I do that for a reason. I keep it outside dirty. Everything, undercarriage and stuff is clean. Radiator's clean. If you know me, you know why I keep it dirty. Anyways. Alright. Time to wipe this pre-stain off. You don't want to leave it on. If you do, it'll just screw up your whole project. And when you wipe with the grain, like so. You want to get as much off as you possibly can from the surface of your project. Now, this technique that I'm using with this clock can be used with pretty much any piece that you're working with. See, you can't really see, well, maybe. Some people use other types of cloth, but this, it works just fine. Now, if you do decide to use a finer grit sandpaper, you probably want to use a, what do they call it? The lintless. You don't want to use this because the finer grit, for some reason, will leave tiny little splinters in your piece, in your finish. And those will usually come out after your first sanding coat of the polyurethane, first or second, and you'll never even notice that they were there. But I don't particularly care for them, so I use a 220. Just helps. Alright, now, if you're one like me and don't like to read directions, this stuff here, if you let it sit for more than an hour after you apply your pre-stain, to put your stain, then you'll have to put some more down. I don't know why, it's just the way it is. I'm going to use this Cherry 225 since, just to provide a good contrast to between the clock and the numbers. If you do it too dark of a stain, and if you're using black numbers like me, then obviously a blind person won't, well, it's just, just better, better, it's gooder. Some people use different stuff. I'm just going to use a disposable plastic spoon to stir this. Works better. You don't have to really worry about air bubbles. You do want to make sure it's mixed well, otherwise your stain will come out looking like shit. Oops, did I say that? I did. Oh well. Alright, got my stain mixed. Now I'm going to apply my stain. Just want to dip the tip of the brush. Don't really need a whole lot. Now, the stain, you just want to get it on there. You definitely want to get it with the grain, and you want to put an even coat. So make sure you go back and forth. Go side to side if you need to. And see right there? That's just going to be natural. That's just part of the natural wood. Sometimes it won't, that natural grain, it won't accept anything. But that's just going to make, that's what, when you hear, oh man, that grain pops. It's the whole purpose of getting a good grain. Makes that grain pop. Now, this is my first clock. And I'm noticing that this piece of wood here is really soaking up stain. And I mean really. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but it don't matter. See, and that's the lightest stain I have, so it's just going to have to work. Okay. Now, what I like to do, I have a workbench here that I made myself. I like to find me a spot that I have not put stuff on, and I'll just hit it with the stain, leftover stain on the brush. Ain't no sense in wasting it. Eventually the entire thing will be covered. It just adds character, and it'll make my bench last a little bit longer. Not really worried about, I mean, it's wood. I mean, all it's going to do is help protect it. Okay. Normally, you let your sand set in for a long time, but since this wood is soaking it in, I'm going to go ahead and wipe it. You usually want to let your sand set for about 10 minutes. The longer you let your sand set, longer let your sand set, the longer it will take